December morning, I woke before the light reached the window. In the kitchen, the kettle hadn't begun to whistle, yet I could hear the house listening to itself. Wood stretching, small cracks echoing like old memories, snow began to fall. Thin as dust. I sat by the window and watched the world slowly disappear behind a fogged pane. And then, in that silence, three knocks. Firm but hesitant. As if someone were asking permission from the past to enter my house, sits at the end of the road that leads into a white field. No one comes here anymore except the postman, and he never this early. I wrapped an old wool scarf around my neck and walked slowly to the door. My hand froze on the cold handle. Something in those knocks made my heart quicken, like a memory being stirred awake. When I opened the door, the wind rushed in, carrying the scent of new snow and damp ash. A woman stood there. Thin, pale strands of hair stuck to her forehead from sleet. Her eyes wet, but not from the weather. She didn't say hello, just held out a small envelope, its edges worn and water-stained. "Someone asked me to bring this to you," she said, her voice hoarse, trembling. I took it, thanked her, a reflex born of long silence. As I looked down at the envelope, a drop, snow melt maybe, landed on its corner. I bent to wipe it away. When I looked up, she was gone. I stepped onto the porch. Only footprints in the snow remained, fading toward the pine woods. No sound, only the wind curling around me, tugging at my coat. I called out, "Miss?" My voice broke in the air and disappeared. No answer. I stood there, still holding the envelope as if it weighed too much for my hand. The paper felt rough, damp, cold, and in the corner, a faint postmark. The kind of blue ink no one had used for years. I went back inside and closed the door. The house exhaled, settling back into its quiet. On the wooden table, I set the letter down. The name written there, trembling, slanted right. So familiar my throat went dry, Daniel. My son. I sat. My hands refused to open it. It took a few minutes, just to breathe, just to remember my heart was still beating. I opened it with the old letter knife, steel darkened by time. Inside, a folded sheet, a streak of smudged ink. That handwriting? I'd seen it every day once. On notes he left beside the flowers, on the teacup I kept washing long after he was gone. The first line read, "Mom, I'm sorry I couldn't come home." That was all. The sentence ended midair without a period. The rest of the page torn away, rough-edged, as if someone had hurriedly erased what they couldn't finish. I read it again and again until the words stopped being words. Only the rhythm of memory breathing. I stood, moved around the kitchen. The kettle boiled over, but I didn't hear it. Only the wind slipping through the doorframe, the soft brush of pine against the roof, like someone knocking again. I opened the door once more, hoping to see her. But the road had turned white completely. No footprints, just smooth snow, like a freshly woven blanket. It felt like someone had just passed through and left warmth in the air. For a moment I wondered, could it be somehow someone was trying to return what time had dropped? I closed the door, still clutching the letter, afraid that if I let go, it would dissolve into air. Afternoon came slow. I sat by the window, watched the snow bury every trace of morning on the table. The letter lay beneath the lamp's soft glow, paper curling gently from the heat. I thought of Daniel, his dirty hands, the light laugh whenever I scolded him for leaving the door unlocked. He used to say, "Mom, the wind will keep it." I never understood until now. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, sounding again like someone knocking. I didn't turn my head, just listened. Because sometimes the only thing we can do is let the wind carry the past back to where it belongs. I brought the letter closer to the fire, my hands trembling. From cold and something else without a name. The house felt falsely warm, as if even the fire wasn't sure whether to burn or fade. I set the envelope on the table, in the thin slice of light falling through the window. Ink bled softly into the paper, like blood seeping through gauze. I recognized that tilt immediately, slow, careful, as if the writer feared to hurt the page. It was Daniel's hand, only. Daniel had been dead 12 years, in a winter just like this. The fire popped in the stove, light flickering across the walls, making the picture frames tremble. I sat, staring at the envelope, as if it might open on its own. The house smelled of dry wood and melting snow, the scent of waiting. On the table, the morning's teacup still stood, cold, a faint ring beneath it, time eating into the grain. Everything was too quiet. So quiet I could hear my heartbeat in my throat. Daniel always wrote with a rightward slant. I used to tease him for it. I said, "Write like that, and one day your letters will look like they're falling over." He laughed. "Then you'll always be there to lift them up, Mom." I laughed too, but now I think he meant more than I knew. I took a breath and opened the letter. The paper was cold and soft, as if it had been touched by water. Blue ink. Thin. Broken. I began to read. "Mom, I'm sorry I couldn't come home." Only that. The line ended with an ellipsis as if the hand had stopped midair. The rest of the sheet torn away, jagged. A darker trail of ink at the edge. Dragged like something unfinished, I read it once. Then again. Each time the words blur a little more, fading into memory. My throat feels dry. My heart. Heavy. As if someone has placed a stone upon my chest, I press the paper into my palm. It smells of ink and of time itself. Your hands once smelled of ink, too. You used to draw in your notebooks instead of doing homework. I would scold you, then sit beside you and watch those awkward strokes turn into kites, dogs, or open hands, reaching out to something I could never see. I can't come home. That line echoes in my head, like a voice lost in an empty room. Can't come home. What does that mean? Not coming because the road is too far? Or because it's already too late? Outside, the wind howls through the cracks. Branches scrape against the window. The light in the room dims, as if even it were afraid. I set the letter down and look around. The photographs, the small things, all the same since the day Daniel left. Everything is still in its place, only I have grown old. I walk to the wooden cabinet by the window. Inside the drawer, I keep what remains of my son. A broken watch, a notebook, and the last letter he sent before he went away. I take them out, compare the handwriting. Identical. Not similar. The same. The tilt, the length of his Y's, the softness whenever he wrote mother. No one else could know this. No one else could imitate the trembling of a hand that once wrote with love. I open the old notebook. On the last unfinished page, it says, "I'll come home when the snow stops." Don't wait on the porch, Mother. I remember the day of the funeral, the snow never stopped. The room feels smaller, the air thicker, the floor creaks, softly then stops. Like footsteps in the hall, I whisper, "Daniel?" No answer, only silence. The kind that makes you believe what you shouldn't believe. I sit again. The letter rests in my hand. Outside, snow drifts slow and heavy like white ash. The fire has dimmed, just a faint red pulse lighting the table. Two letters lie side by side, one from 12 years ago, one that arrived this morning. A draft slips through the door, stirring the edge of the new one. A corner lifts slightly, as if touched by an invisible hand. "If there's something you haven't said," I whisper, "I'm still listening." The house falls quiet. Only the wind remains. And somewhere in that cold air, I hear a breath. Soft. Close. Then gone, like snow melting against skin. I open the door. The wind rushes in, bringing the scent of wood smoke and wet snow on the steps. A few footprints, fading toward the empty road. No one there. Only the pines swaying, and the faint clinking of metal somewhere down the hill. I stand still, hearing my heart beneath the wool of my sweater. Then I close the door. The hinge creaks dryly, like someone sighing. The house is so quiet now, I can hear the ticking of the clock. Each beat small, steady, certain I haven't noticed that sound since Daniel left. Now it feels like footsteps, circling the room from within the walls. A cup of tea sits cold on the table. The steam mark on its rim has dried. I don't remember making it. The kettle is half empty. Maybe it was this morning. Maybe it wasn't me. I walk through the house, room by room. Nothing has changed. Or maybe everything has, and I simply didn't notice Daniel's winter scarf still lies on the sofa, the fabric frayed, curled as if holding someone's warmth. I stop at the window. Snow falls quietly, sliding down the glass. Outside, the world seems to wait for something or someone. And for a moment, I think I hear a voice, faint, carried by the wind. I open the letter again. The paper is soft, creased from my hands. The handwriting leans gently, so familiar I have to look away. I read again. Mother, I'm sorry I can't come home. The last line is torn. I touch the edge. The ink has bled like a wound not yet healed. On the table, his old fountain pen lies open. He used it in high school. I don't remember taking it out. Its cap is off and there's a fresh stain of ink at the tip. I pick it up. It feels warm, achingly familiar. When I lower it to the paper, a droplet of ink falls, landing beside the word mother. I stop breathing. A sound comes from the hallway, soft like someone setting down a cup I turn, but the house is still. Only the framed photograph on the wall tilts slightly, the wood frame trembling as if brushed by wind. I walk toward the hallway. The last light of day spills through the curtains, dividing the house in two. Warm and cold. Each step I take creaks on the old wood floor. At the end of the hall, Daniel's door is ajar. A thin strip of light touches my feet. I push the door open. The air inside is colder, and then I smell it. Soap, wood, and something that belongs to the morning he died. The desk is neat. On it, a brown notebook lies open, the pages turning slightly in the wind. No words, only a smear of ink as if someone began to write and stopped halfway. I sit down, place my hand on the desk. It feels warm beneath my palm. Faintly, like a body that just left. Suddenly, a gust of wind blows through the window, lifting the curtains. A single page flies out, brushes past me, lands on the floor. I pick it up. There's only one line, shaky, almost faded. Don't be afraid, Mother. I'm just passing through. I whisper his name. The room doesn't answer, but the wind has stopped, and in that silence, I hear it. A breath beside me. That night, I light the oil lamp in the living room. Its glow flickers on the wall, brushing across Daniel's photograph. Our shadows stretch long, merging until I can't tell which is which. The cup of tea is still there. A thin trail of steam rises, as if it's just been poured again. I sit quietly. There's no need to speak. Outside, the wind rests. Snow drifts slower now. The house no longer trembles. It listens. When I close my eyes, I can almost feel a small hand rest upon my shoulder. Warm, gentle, then fading into air. I open my eyes. The paper on the table lifts once, then falls, as if someone has left again. And I whisper into the quiet, "You came home, didn't you?" No answer. Only the clock ticking. Steady, alive again. The next morning, I leave the house. Snow has buried the main road. The post office stands at the corner beside a bakery that closed last summer. Smoke rises from a chimney across the street, curling into the gray sky. I hold the envelope inside my coat pocket. It's warm now, though the paper is still damp with cold. The postmark is smudged, like a memory that no longer wants to be read. When I pushed the door open, the little bell above the wooden frame chimed softly. In the stillness of that place, it sounded like a greeting from the past. The post office was small, only two counters filled with the smell of old paper and plastic ink stamps. On the wall hung last year's calendar, still untouched. A faded photograph of an autumn field. Light from the window spilled across the floor. Pale, calm, and cold. Mr. Harris, the postmaster, had been here since I was young. His hair was silver, his glasses slipping down his nose, and his voice slow, as if afraid to disturb the air. "Morning, Mrs. May," he said without looking up. "Haven't seen you out in a while." I nodded. I didn't know how to begin. I placed the envelope on the counter. "Could you tell me where this letter was sent from?" He picked it up, tilting it under the light. His old fingers brushed the postmark, tracing the worn edge of the stamp. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he slowly removed his glasses, wiping them against his sleeve. This mark, he murmured. I haven't seen it in the new system. Looks old, very old. He pulled a thick leather ledger from the drawer, its spine cracked, its cover dusty, each page filled with careful handwriting, crooked but deliberate. He turned through them one by one, his eyes narrowing. I've recorded every postmark change in the last 15 years, he said, but this one isn't listed. I watched him turn the envelope, light catching the corner of the faded stamp on it, a seagull. Its wings nearly vanished, only the outline remaining. I remember this series, he whispered. They stopped printing it in 2013. It's 2025 now. His voice trailed off. It shouldn't exist anymore. The clock on the wall ticked. Each sound pressed heavier against my chest. He leaned closer. Strange paper, too, he said. Old, but not brittle. As if it's been kept somewhere dry. Dark. And guarded. I looked at him, then at the envelope. The sender's name, Daniel. The way the letters leaned, long and trembling. I could never forget that Mr. Harris stayed quiet for a long moment, then lifted his gaze, uncertain. Who did you say gave this to you? A woman, I said. Mid-30s. She said someone asked her to deliver it. He tilted his head. Asked her? I nodded. I didn't get her name. When I opened the letter, she was gone. He stared at me, then reached for the old phone on the counter, his voice low, almost to himself. Helen, check the special delivery log from last week. Anything sent from this address? A pause. No, thank you. He set the receiver down and sighed. No record. No delivery to your address for at least 3 months. I touched the corner of the envelope. It felt cold, as if it had traveled too far through time to still belong here. Maybe someone kept it, he said, and sent it only now. But why now? That question stayed in my head, even as he set the envelope back on the counter, so gently, as if it might dissolve in his hands. I left the post office with the letter in my coat pocket. The wind had risen, stronger now, swirling bits of snow around my feet. Across the street, the old post office sign creaked, swaying on its chain. Through the glass door, I saw Mr. Harris still standing there, watching me go. The light reflected off his glasses, hiding his eyes. Only his faint outline remained. I kept walking, my boots sinking deep into the fresh snow. At the end of the street, the bell inside the post office rang again. Though no one had entered, I stopped. Turned back. The door was closed, and through the wind I thought I heard someone call my name. A man's voice, warm, distant. And I knew the wind carried something older than memory today. Snow blanketed the path like an old quilt. Thick, silent, eternal. I walked slowly, my shoes cracking the thin ice beneath, each sound like a sigh. Beyond the fields, the pines still stood, dark, weathered, like witnesses who refused to forget. It had been 12 years since Daniel left this place, but the wind still blew in the same direction, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I stopped where the road curved around the field. The place they said his car had slipped off the edge on a night just like this one. No one comes here anymore. The small bridge across the ditch has half collapsed, its planks broken and covered in moss. I remember that night, the cold rain, the blind headlights, and the words everyone said. It was just an accident. But I never fully believed them. There's something in the way the wind turns against me here, as if it's saying, not yet. I tightened my scarf and stepped toward the largest pine, the one where I had placed the first bouquet for my son. There's another bouquet there now, fresh, new, roses dusted with snow but not wilted. I touched them, cold, like metal. No one in town remembers Daniel anymore. Or maybe they simply choose not to. No one has a reason to come here, not in the heart of winter. I looked around. Only my footprints marked the snow. And that bouquet, standing silent, like a message with no sender, I knelt, brushing the snow from its base. A dark blue ribbon tied around the stems, Daniel's favorite color. And then I remembered. I once kept a roll of ribbon just like that in my drawer, but it had been missing for years. The wind rose again, sliding through my hair, shaking the branches above me. Then up, a sound, soft, like paper, rustling beneath the snow. I bent down. Between the petals, a small piece of paper had been caught by the wind, half hidden, half revealed. I pulled it gently. The edge was damp. On it, just 4 words, written in a hand I knew by heart. Tomorrow at the old station. I read them again and again, the slanted strokes, slightly trembling. It was Daniel's handwriting. I knew it because I had once taught him how to write, because I had kept his first scribbles in the kitchen drawer, just to hear that bright laugh when he misread his own words. My hands trembled. The paper slipped away, caught in the wind. I caught it again, pressing it into my coat pocket. And in that moment, I felt someone standing behind me. I turned. No one. Only the pines. Silent, still. Snow began to fall heavier, thick flakes landing on my shoulders. I drew a deep breath, the scent of winter, cold and ashen like buried memory. Daniel? I whispered, unsure why. The sound broke apart in the wind, then disappeared. I walked slowly, searching for other footprints, any trace that someone else had been there. Nothing. Only mine, solitary, stretching back toward the old wooden gate. And then I remembered something. 3 days before he vanished, Daniel had said, "I want to leave this town, Mom. There's something here that doesn't want me to go." I had laughed then, thinking it was just fear speaking. But now those words returned. Heavier than the snow on my shoulders, I looked out across the field. The horizon blurred with mist. And there, for a moment, I thought I saw a figure. Far away, standing still, then gone. On the way home, I didn't look back. Snow fell thicker, erasing the path behind me. As I passed the old fence, I stopped. A black bird landed on the post, tilting its head and let out a single low call. The sound was almost like my name. I touched my coat pocket, the small piece of paper still inside. It felt warm now, as if alive. Tomorrow, at the old station. I murmured it to myself. I didn't know who had left that message. But I knew. If I didn't go, I would never find peace. The wind swept through again, rattling the distant pines. The sound of leaves against each other, like footsteps. I kept walking, not fast, not slow. Snow fell into my hair and melted, like old memories returning, one by one. I reached the station before sunrise. Fog lay thick, so heavy I could hear my own footsteps sliding over the ice. The old station stood still, a body long abandoned. Broken glass, rusted rails, signs faded beyond reading. No train had run here in more than a decade. But that morning, a thin wisp of smoke rose from the waiting room. I stopped. Inhaled, not smoke from fire, warmth, as if someone had just boiled water, waiting. Outside, the clock on the wall still pointed to 6:07. Its second hand frozen, yet in my head, it ticked steady. Cold. I pushed the door open. The hinges cried softly into the morning air. Inside, the dust shimmered with silver light seeping through cracks in the glass. I remembered the last time I was here. Daniel was small. Then he liked to sit on the bench watching the trains pass. He said every person on board was a story. Now, no one. Only the benches blanketed in snow. And on the table, a paper cup, steam still rising from it, the water still warm. I moved closer, my hand trembling. A faint pink lipstick stain traced the rim. "You came." The voice came from behind me, and soft but clear, I turned. A woman stood at the end of the hall wearing a gray coat. I recognized her instantly. She was the one I'd seen at Mr. Clark's funeral last year, standing apart, saying nothing, just watching me. Now the light caught her face, pale, calm, as if she had been waiting all this time. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice cracked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward, lifting the cup in both hands. A quiet ritual. The steam clouded her eyes, and for a moment I couldn't see her expression. "I used to work at the Northern Convalescent Ward," she said. Most of the people sent there had no names, just numbers. I frowned. What ward? She set the cup down gently. They used to call it Haven Hill, she said. The place they sent survivors of accidents, the ones no one wanted to be found. The air thickened, heavy as frost, my nails pressed into the wood of the bench. What are you talking about? I said. Daniel, he's dead. My voice broke. She looked straight at me. No, ma'am, she whispered. He was there. For a long time. A long silence. Only the wind moving through the shattered window. I took care of him, she said, softer now. But one day, he disappeared. No one knew where he went. I stood frozen, the ground beneath me hollowing away. Haven Hill. The name rang in my head. Familiar? Wrong? I remembered seeing it once in an old newspaper a facility closed after a fire. I asked, barely breathing, how long? Are you saying he was there? About 10 years, she said softly. Maybe longer. The light came through the cracked window, falling across her hair. Dust drifted in the beam, floating, uncertain, like memories that hadn't yet landed. I found a letter, I said, my voice shaking. Daniel's handwriting. It said, Mom, I'm sorry I couldn't come home. She nodded slowly. He wrote many letters. None were ever sent. They were afraid someone outside might find out. I couldn't breathe. I pictured my son sitting in a white room, writing letters no one would ever read. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. She looked out toward the tracks, where the sun had begun to rise through the rust. Because they're tearing the place down, she said, and because I thought you should know, and he might still be alive. When I stepped out of the station, daylight had fully come. The first sunlight struck the frozen rails, glinting like blades. The woman didn't follow me. She stood in the doorway, one hand on the rotted frame, watching. I wasn't sure if that shimmer on her cheek was light or tears. In the snow behind me, there were two sets of footprints, hers and mine. Then the wind rose, and one by one, the marks began to fade. I stopped, turned back toward the station. The window where she had stood was empty now. From my pocket, I took out the small piece of paper. Tomorrow at the old station. It was damp, the ink beginning to blur. I clenched it in my fist, listening to the wind hum through the power lines. A low, steady sound, like a train approaching from very far away. Maybe Daniel had never truly left. Maybe I just hadn't known where to find him. That afternoon, snow fell thin as ash. I sat in a small cafe across from the station. Steam from my cup fogged the glass, turning the world outside to ghostly shapes. Across the table, the nurse sat quietly, her gray coat wet from the snow, hands folded around something in her lap. She set it down in front of me, a small leather journal, dark brown, the edges worn and soft. Without a word, she pushed it toward me. I touched the cover. It was cold. The leather smelled of mildew and dust, as if pulled from a place it shouldn't have survived. Daniels, she said. Her voice drifted, smaller than the sound of snow tapping against the window. I opened the journal carefully, afraid it might crumble. The first page was almost blank, only a few scattered names. Ellen, Joseph, Dr. Hale. And below them, a single phrase written over and over. Haven Hill. The nurse sat still, her eyes fixed not on me, but on the cooling tea between us. I found it in the archive, she said, among the things that didn't burn. I turned the pages Daniel's handwriting, and I knew it instantly, though blurred by water or tears. Sentences trailed off mid-thought. I'm sorry for... They said I had to. If I don't, then they will. I stopped reading. Something heavy and alive moved inside my chest. At the edge of one page, there was a dark smear and like smoke. And in the corner, slanted small words. Keep the promise. I asked quietly, do you know what promise he meant? The nurse didn't answer right away. Her hands closed slowly, her nails leaving pale marks on her skin. Not exactly, she said, but everyone has something they never got to say. I traced my finger across the uneven paper. It felt like the surface of a map. Between broken sentences, a small symbol, a circle around the letter H beneath it, a date, March 14th. It hit me. That was my birthday. And Daniel had vanished just days after I closed my eyes, trying to hear his voice again. I promise, Mom, I won't let them do it anymore. Back then, I hadn't understood what he meant. Now the words came back like a warped old recording, crackling, fading, mixing with the wind outside. I think he saw something, the nurse said quietly. At Haven Hill, there were experiments, things never written down. I looked up. She wasn't looking at me, but out the window where snow had swallowed the tracks. Daniel wasn't supposed to be there, she went on, but he refused to leave. He said he had a promise to keep. I repeated, barely a whisper. A promise to whom? Her lips tightened, her voice almost disappearing. Maybe to someone he couldn't save. I turned to the final page. The paper was wrinkled, as if once crumpled and smoothed again. In the center, just one line. If you're reading this, Mom, I kept my promise. I stared at it until the letters blurred. No signature, no date. The nurse placed her hand on the table. There were people at Haven Hill who never made it into the record, she said. I think Daniel tried to protect their names. Maybe he traded his freedom to keep their secret. Outside, the wind rose, shaking the cafe windows. Our reflections blurred into two shadowed figures in the mist. So now, I asked, if he's still alive? What then? She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes after seeing something that shouldn't exist. Then maybe, she said, he's still keeping that promise. I closed the journal. The leather made a small, dry sound. On the cover was a thin, crescent-shaped cut, as if someone had once hidden something inside, then sewn it shut. I left the cafe at dusk. The snow had stopped, but the wind carried a soft hum through the yellow streetlights. The journal felt heavier in my coat pocket than it should have. With each step, I heard it brush against the fabric, a whisper too faint to be called sound. Before turning down the hill toward home, I stopped. In the distance, the old station glowed faintly in the dark. A flicker of light from the second floor where there shouldn't have been any power left. I stood there, watching until the light went out. The wind carried a faint trace of smoke. I didn't know from where, only that it smelled familiar, like Daniel's hair after long nights out. Softly, I whispered, "What promise did you keep, my son?" No answer came. Only the snow falling again, slow, slanted into the dark. How long was he there? I asked. Not long enough for anyone to remember his name, the old man said. Then one night, during the great snowstorm, he was gone. I held the photograph closer to the fire. The man's face wavered in the heat, as if trying to escape the paper. Is the northern road far? I asked. He looked out the window, where snow was starting to fall thick again. Far enough, he said, that no one ever wants to return. By late afternoon, I was walking that way. The road was steep, winding, and so silent that I could hear my own steps pressing into the snow. The barn appeared like a shadow in the white. Wooden walls bleached pale, the door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Everything around it was buried under snow. Except for one small dark patch where smoke had once risen from the roof, I pushed the door. The hinge cried, a long, cold, lonely sound. Inside, rust and old ash tangled in the air. A long table stood beneath a soaked tarpaulin. I pulled it back. Beneath were broken glass jars, ink-stained notes, and a faded map laced with red threads. At the center, circled twice on the words, Haven Hill. I knew that handwriting Daniel's. Next to the map sat a small wooden box, its lock snapped open. Inside, a silver ring engraved with the letters LM and a thin chain. Daniel never wore rings, and I didn't know who LM was. I stood still. The wind outside slipped through the cracks in the wall and whispering like someone speaking from the other side. When I turned to leave, a pale light from the window fell across a corner of the room, revealing something covered by an old blanket. I stepped closer. Under the cloth, a cracked wooden frame. Inside it, another photograph. Daniel, the same quiet face, seated at a desk writing, and behind him the same man, his hand resting on Daniel's shoulder. At the top corner, a line of black ink read, "The Keeper of the Promise." I gripped the frame so tightly that the wood bit into my palm. Outside, the wind howled harder, forcing the door open until it slammed against the wall. A small piece of paper slipped from the desk, fluttering to the floor. Old, but the ink still clear. "If they ask, tell them I'm dead." I sank to the cold floor, my heart beat slow like an old clock struggling to keep time. And then I understood. The promise Daniel had spoken of. It wasn't a promise made to me, it was a promise made to protect something or someone. Here, in this place I left the barn when night had fully taken over, snow had already covered my footprints as if I had never been there. Halfway down the road, I looked back once more. The door closed, though I remembered leaving it open. A faint light leaked through a crack in the wood like a small lamp still burning somewhere inside. I stood in the wind for a long time, my breath turning to smoke. In my coat pocket, the photograph felt damp and cold. Daniel stood beside that man, not afraid, only silent. The wind carried a distant sound. It's as if someone far away was closing the lid of a wooden box. Softly, I said into the dark, "What are you hiding from me, Daniel?" No answer, only snow falling over the old tracks, quiet as a mourning veil. I went back there on a Saturday morning when the sun was still hiding behind thick gray clouds. The road north of town was covered in a thin layer of ice, crisp as memory. The wind moved through the pines, making a sound that could have been a whisper. The barn stood apart from everything else, its wooden skin faded to gray, alone against the white. When I touched the handle, the metal burned with cold, like touching my own fear. The door creaked open. A sound so old, it felt as if someone had been waiting just to hear it again. Inside, it was darker than I expected. A single slit of light fell through the roof, cutting across the floor dusted in powder and decay. I waited for my eyes to adjust. My breath curled in front of me, trembling. The air smelled of old wood, wax, and rust. Every step drew a protest from the floorboards. On the desk, a tilted chair, a few melted candles, and a leather notebook. There were handprints on it, faint but newer than the rest of the room. I opened it carefully. Blue ink, blurred at the corners, and in the middle of the page, Daniel's name. My heart slowed. My hands trembled. Between the pages, a letter lay hidden, unsent. The paper had yellowed, but the ink was still fresh. I breathed in. The scent of old paper tasted like winter. It began the way he always started his letters. "Dearest Mother." The handwriting was hurried but steady, as if he were trying to stay calm while the world shifted around him. He wrote that he had met someone, a wounded man fleeing through the woods. Daniel said the man never gave his name, only asked for shelter for one night. But that night, the snow fell heavier than any before, and the man never left. "I think he was afraid of something, Mom," Daniel wrote. "So afraid, he couldn't even look out the window. I could picture him sitting here, the candle burning low, wax frozen along the edge of the table." He wrote that later, the man asked him to deliver a letter to a woman in a red coat. Daniel didn't ask why. At the end, he wrote, "If anything happens, they'll bring the letter back to you." I read that line over and over. Each time, the word they sank deeper into my palm. I sat down in the same chair he must have used. The wind whistled through the cracks, the wood groaning like an old voice remembering too much. I could almost see it. My son and that stranger, sitting together in silence in the cold light of snow and candle. I looked around, a tin cup overturned, a heavy coat hanging by the door, and beneath the table, a wooden box covered in a thin coat of dust. I opened it. Inside, nothing extraordinary. A few rusted bullets, a torn scrap of map, and a small pine branch tied with a strip of red cloth. I lifted it. The resin smell was still faintly there. Perhaps Daniel had kept it since his last day here. On the table's edge, a small carving, almost careless. The letter D next to it. Another letter, M. I didn't know who had carved it. Or why. I whispered my son's name, but the sound broke apart in the cold. Who was that man? And why did Daniel choose to help him in the middle of that winter? I stepped outside. The door closed behind me with the same weary creak. Snow began to fall, slow, thick, and so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood for a long time, staring at the forest beyond. Somewhere in that white silence Daniel had once walked. Maybe he was still there, somewhere between the trees. I held the letter tight, the warmth of my palm softening the paper. The woman who brought it to me. Could she be them? The one Daniel mentioned at the end? The wind picked up, lifting a single snowflake into the air, carrying it far away. I watched until I couldn't tell what I was seeing anymore. I went back to the nurse's old house, the one with the window facing the woods, where winter always arrived a day earlier than in town. No smoke rose from the chimney, only snow on the steps and a single footprint, almost erased by the wind. I knocked. No answer. The sound echoed back, swallowed by the emptiness of the house. I stood there, listening, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard the faint crackle of a candle burning somewhere inside. Soft, like the breath of an old soul that refused to go out. The door opened when I pushed gently. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and damp wood, mingled with the faint scent of burned wax. Everything felt half abandoned. A cup of cold tea on the table, a coat draped loosely over a chair, curtains trembling in the wind. I stepped in. My shoes left trails of mud across the wooden floor, the only marks alive in a room where time had stopped breathing. A single candle still burned on the table, its flame quivering. Fighting to exist in the heavy chill, I looked around. Stained walls, dusty corners, a few faded photographs. In one of them, the nurse stood among a group of patients, everyone smiling, except for a man in the back. His face blurred, hidden beneath a dark scarf. On the table lay a folded piece of paper, wrinkled, its edge singed, as if someone had tried to burn it, then changed their mind. I opened it. There was only one line. He saved my life. I only returned what was fair. I read it again and again. The handwriting slanted, delicate. The nurse's hand, the same hand that trembled when she first poured me tea. He saved my life. I whispered the words and looked around the room once more. Everything spoke of haste, as if she had left moments after writing it. The window was ajar, wind carried in tiny flakes of snow, melting on the table. A few drops fell onto the paper, and the ink bled, red like an old wound. I touched the word fairness. It made my chest tighten. Daniel once told me, "Mother, fairness isn't always right." Now, I understand. The man in the photograph, the one who hid in the woods, he was the one Daniel saved. And this nurse, perhaps, was the one that man saved later. A chain of deaths, twisted and silent. Each person holding one fragment of a story, and when they left a hollow for the next to find. But why? Why did Daniel's letter arrive now after all these winters had melted away? I stepped outside. The sky had darkened. Snow began to fall again, quietly, gently, like ash. The old neighbor stood by his fence watching me. He said the nurse had left years ago, his voice thin like smoke. She went with a man, the one with the dark scarf, he added, then turned back inside the dark scarf. I remembered the photograph. The man behind her, hunched slightly, hands hidden in his coat pockets. I looked toward the road leading into the woods, now only a long white ribbon stretching into nothingness. The wind shook the branches like a hand pointing somewhere I couldn't see. And I understood. Daniel had been here. He had chosen to keep their secret. Maybe he gave his life so another could live. Maybe he died so someone else could move on. But what broke me was not his death, but the letter why they sent it to me after all these years. Perhaps someone among them could no longer bear the silence. Perhaps this winter was the moment they wanted me to know. I turned back to the house one last time. The candle on the table had gone out. Only a thin wisp of smoke curled upward, fading into the pale light that snow reflected through the window. I stood at the doorway, the nurse's letter in my hand, feeling as if I were holding the final warmth of a story long asleep. Outside, the wind brushed against the roof, making a sound like a voice. Something half spoken, never finished. I closed my eyes. In the dark, I saw Daniel, not the child I once held, but a man, standing in the snow, smiling. A soft smile, but not with his eyes. That morning, the first light of thawing winter slipped through the window. The snow on the sill had softened, revealing tiny specks of dust shimmering like fragments of memory refusing to fade. I sat there holding two letters, one old, frail as ash, Daniel's arriving years too late, the other, newer, written in a gentle hand I'd never known. Outside, water dripped from the roof, steady and patient, counting down the last moments of a story closing itself. This winter moved slowly. Even when the sun rose, it lingered, quiet and persistent, like longing that won't let go. Each morning, I still sit by the same window, the one facing the bare trees. My hands have learned the weight of letters, light, dry, yet heavy with all that remains unsaid. I open Daniel's letter again. The edges are worn, the ink blurred by someone's tears, not mine, I think. If you're reading this, Mother, it means I kept my promise. I stop there. There are no more words. That promise, I have thought of it 100 times. Now I don't need to know what it was. There are things we try to understand only because we haven't yet found peace. When we stop asking, it means forgiveness has begun. The second letter, from the woman, has only a few lines. He saved my life, I only did what a debtor must do. Her voice still lingers in the wind, among the breaths of those long gone. I place both letters beside the cold cup of tea. Outside, the snow on the roof begins to slide off, falling into the yard where Daniel once learned to ride his bike. Back then, I was still young. I remember how the afternoon light rested on his shoulders, how he turned to smile, tooth-gapped, eyes wide, ready to swallow the world. I thought I could forget that image. But memories do not fade with time. They only sleep beneath the snow, waiting for the thaw. The window fogs with my breath. I write two names upon the glass, Daniel, and beneath it, a single dot, not an ending. Just a pause. In that moment, I realize all this time, I've been searching for Daniel in everyone, in the nurse, in the carpenter, in the empty rooms left behind. But Daniel perhaps never left. He simply found a place to rest after keeping his promise. And I have found what he left behind. Not the truth, but kindness. By afternoon, the light turns the color of honey. The last rays slip through the frame, lying quietly across the wooden floor like a letter that never needed sending. Outside, the ice has melted into shallow pools, reflecting a sky smudged with gray. I walk slowly down the old road that leads to the abandoned station. The trains no longer run there, yet in my mind, the sound of metal still echoes, as if one last carriage has yet to leave the station of memory. I stop before the wooden fence, looking at the patch of ground where Daniel's footprints once were. Now only a streak of light falls there, thin and long, like a thread, tying two worlds together. The wind moves, carrying a strange, gentle warmth. For the first time, I no longer feel cold. I smile. Not because sorrow has left me, but because it has finally found a place to rest. Daniel doesn't need to return anymore. Because what was his kindness, his silence, his promise, is already here. In every breath of wind, in the open palm of my hand, I sit again by the window. The tea is still cold, but its scent remains soft. On the sill, two letters rest side by side, their edges curling slightly in the warmth of the fading day. Outside, a pale light breaks through, slipping past the last cloud of winter. It isn't bright, just enough to illuminate the face of someone smiling in memory. I whisper softly as if to myself, sometimes truth isn't meant to be known, but forgiven. Then silence. But this silence no longer weighs. There is only the drip of water from the eaves and the faint sensation of snow melting on skin.